Eliza and Tom's wedding was the epitome of elegance, set against the backdrop of the grand estate that had been in Tom's family for generations. The lawn was meticulously groomed, white chairs lined up in perfect rows with a narrow aisle leading to a flower-adorned arch where they would exchange vows. Music floated softly in the background, a gentle accompaniment to the murmurs of arriving guests, each dressed in their finest. As the ceremony began, Eliza entered on the arm of her father, radiant in a flowing white gown. Tom, waiting under the arch, looked every bit the dashing groom. Amid the assembled friends and family, Alex, Eliza's younger brother, stood slightly apart. His smile was a bit too stiff, his claps slightly too loud. His toast, later on, caught some off guard with its intensity. "To my sister, Eliza, who has always been the star of our family," Alex began, his voice strong but his hands trembling just slightly as he lifted his champagne flute. "And to Tom, who has taken that star and made it his universe. Today I lose a sister but gain, well, I suppose I'm supposed to say I gain a brother. But it feels more like I'm losing both." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of discomfort and confusion. Alex chuckled awkwardly, brushing off his words with a joke, but the tension had settled like a fine mist, subtle yet undeniable. As the laughter died down and the dancing began, the clouds that had been threatening all day finally burst, rain pattering against the marquee with a rhythm that mirrored the increasing heaviness in Alex's heart. He watched from the sidelines, his drink forgotten in his hand, as Eliza and Tom danced, lost in their own world. His earlier words echoed in his mind, a growing storm of resentment and loss swirling within him as the celebrations continued around him. The reception was in full swing despite the relentless downpour that drummed on the canvas of the marquee. Guests swirled in a whirlwind of colors on the dance floor, laughter and music blending into a lively symphony. Alex, however, became an increasingly solitary figure as the evening wore on, his initial attempts at joviality giving way to brooding isolation. He drifted from the bright lights and chatter, his mood darkening with the sky outside. He refilled his glass repeatedly, the sharp tang of the whiskey barely registering as he downed each drink. His movements grew unsteady, his glances towards the newlyweds tinged with a bitter edge. Whispered concerns began to ripple among the closest family members, their eyes flicking nervously in Alex's direction, noting his disheveled appearance and the way his laughter no longer reached his eyes. As the couple excused themselves for a private photo shoot in a beautifully lit gazebo away from the main celebration, Alex's gaze followed them, a stormy expression clouding his face. He muttered something under his breath and set down his glass with a force that made the tableware clink. He then slipped away unnoticed, moving with an urgency that belied his earlier inebriation. Minutes later, a scream shattered the convivial atmosphere. It sliced through the music and laughter like a knife, bringing the festivities to a jarring halt. Guests froze, expressions turning from joy to confusion, then to horror. The mother of the bride was the first to react, her maternal instincts sending her running towards the source of the scream, the gazebo. There, in the dimly lit charm of what was meant to be a backdrop for memories, lay a scene of carnage. Eliza and Tom were sprawled on the ground, their wedding attire stained red, a stark contrast to the white flowers surrounding them. The bride's mother collapsed, her cries echoing over the rain as guests rushed to the scene, their celebration turning to chaos. The initial shock gave way to frantic action. Calls for help mingled with sobs, as the realization of what had happened spread like wildfire. The police arrived swiftly, their blue lights casting eerie shadows as they cordoned off the area, and a grim-faced detective began to gather accounts from the shaken witnesses. Everyone mentioned Alex's odd behavior and his sudden disappearance from the party. The last anyone saw, he had headed in the direction of the gazebo, just moments before the tragedy struck. In the quiet of the police station, Alex sat across from Detective Harrow, his clothes still damp from the rain, specks of mud on his shoes. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, as he stared down at his handcuffed wrists resting on the metal table. The detective eyed him intently, her notes and photographs of the crime scene spread out before her. "Alex, we need to understand what happened tonight," Detective Harrow began, her voice even but firm. "You were found near the gazebo, disoriented and covered in blood. Can you explain why? Alex's gaze flickered up, meeting hers briefly before dropping again. I, I went to talk to them, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I just wanted to talk. Talk about what, Alex? The detective pressed, leaning forward slightly. About how everything was changing, about how I felt left behind. But it didn't go well. We argued. His hands trembled visibly as he spoke, the memory of the night flashing through his mind. Detective Harrow noted his agitation. What did you argue about, Alex? He swallowed hard, his throat tight. I accused them of not caring about me anymore. Eliza tried to calm me down, but I was so angry. I don't know how it all got so out of control. Alex, the detective's voice was a touch softer now, seeking the truth in his haunted look. What happened next? Alex closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his cheek. I had a knife, from the cake cutting. I didn't mean to do anything with it. It was just there in my hand when we were arguing. And then, Harrow prompted gently. I don't remember. It all just blurred, Alex whispered, his voice breaking. I remember the screaming, and then running away. I was scared. I didn't realize what I'd done until it was too late. Detective Harrow took a deep breath, piecing together the confession with the evidence they had gathered. Alex, we found the knife not far from the scene. Your fingerprints, Eliza's blood, it's all fitting together. Alex nodded miserably, the weight of his actions settling in, crushing. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he said, his voice a mix of despair and realization. As the detective called in an officer to take Alex to a holding cell, she lingered for a moment, looking at the young man who had let his unresolved emotions culminate in a tragic impulse. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving a silence that was louder than the earlier chaos. Detective Harrow reflected on the fragility of human relationships, on how quickly joy could turn to despair, and how the line between love and hate could sometimes blur, leading to irreversible consequences. As the days passed, the shock of the tragedy at the wedding settled into a deep, pervasive grief. Eliza and Tom's families grappled with the immense loss, their sorrow magnified by the harrowing knowledge that the perpetrator was one of their own. Alex, now detained and awaiting trial, remained withdrawn, a shell of his former self, haunted by the gravity of his actions. The legal proceedings began, a tedious and painful process for everyone involved. In the courtroom, the evidence was presented methodically, the chilling photographs of the crime scene, the blood-stained knife, the testimonies of the wedding guests who had seen Alex's erratic behavior, and finally, Alex's own fragmented confession. Throughout the trial, Alex's parents sat in the gallery, their expressions a mix of heartbreak and disbelief. They mourned not only for their daughter and son-in-law but also for their son, whose life had taken such a devastating turn. The community around them struggled to reconcile the bright, loving boy they knew with the actions he was accused of. In his final statement to the court, Alex spoke through tears, his voice trembling. I loved my sister and I loved Tom, he said, his words heavy with regret. What I did is unforgivable, and I will carry this guilt for the rest of my life. I am so sorry for the pain I've caused. The judge, somber and deliberate, sentenced Alex to a long term in prison, stressing the tragic waste of life and the irreversible sorrow caused to the families. Let this case be a reminder, the judge concluded, of the destructive power of unchecked emotions and unresolved conflicts. After the sentencing, the families returned to a life markedly different from before. The wedding venue, once a place of celebration, stood quiet and empty, the memories of that day lingering like ghosts. The parents visited the grave of Eliza and Tom, placing flowers and whispering words of love and missed opportunities. Detective Harrow, who had seen too many families torn apart by similar tragedies, visited Alex in prison. She brought him books on grief and redemption, hoping to spark some light in the darkness of his remorse. They talked occasionally about recovery, forgiveness, and the difficult path to understanding oneself. The story concluded with a scene at the now peaceful wedding venue, the storm clouds long gone, replaced by a serene sky. The camera panned over the empty chairs and the quiet arch, a symbolic reminder of the thin line between joy and despair. It was a visual epitaph for the young couple and a poignant emblem of hope and healing for the families, suggesting that even in the deepest sorrow, there could be a new beginning. As the months and years unwound, the lives of those affected by the tragedy on that bloody wedding day continued in quiet, measured steps. Alex's parents, once vibrant figures in their community, retreated into a more reserved existence, marked by private grief and public sympathy. They established a foundation in memory of Eliza and Tom, focusing on conflict resolution and mental health awareness, attempting to forge something hopeful from the wreckage. In prison, Alex participated in therapy sessions and conflict resolution workshops, confronting the dark impulses and unaddressed emotions that had led to his destructive actions. Over time, he became a facilitator for other inmates, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the consequences of letting anger and jealousy take control. Detective Harrow, moved by the case's profound impact, began lecturing at police academies and community centers about the psychological underpinnings of domestic violence and the importance of early intervention in familial disputes. Her talks highlighted the case without revealing identities, using it to illustrate how deeply buried issues could escalate into unimaginable tragedy. The community slowly healed, their resilience fortified by collective mourning and mutual support. Annual memorials brought people together, not only to remember Eliza and Tom but also to discuss community health and preventive measures against such domestic tragedies. The final scene of the story offered a panoramic view of the wedding venue as it hosted a new event, a conference on peace and reconciliation, symbolically reclaiming the space from the echoes of the past. Attendees included psychologists, community leaders, and families who had experienced similar losses, all gathered to learn from each other and to promote a culture of openness and healing. The camera slowly pulled away from the gathering, rising above the lush, healed grounds, moving towards the horizon where the sun set in a calm, clear sky. The fading light whispered promises of forgiveness and renewal, suggesting that while the past may never be undone, the future still held room for growth, understanding, and peace. This final image lingered, a quiet testament to the enduring human spirit's capacity to overcome and transform even the most profound sorrows.